Michael Pillar, if you don't mind joining myself and the Fireside Chat team that we have up here. Couldn't be more excited. Welcome to the stage, please, our good friend, Michael.
Hey everybody, so Michael Pillar, contracting officer, stationed here as a RapidX liaison out of beautiful Austin, Texas. So before I bring on our two esteemed guests, I'd like to give you an intro. So gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind coming on stage, I would like to welcome to the stage Major General Holt. Yep. Major General Holt is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Contracting for the United States Air Force, where he leads all the mission-focused business leaders in support of warfighters through the training, organizing, and equipping of over 8,000 contracting officers who execute about $65 billion annually. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely great to be here. Thanks.
Mr. Joe Lonsdale. Honored to introduce Mr. Lonsdale. So Mr. Joe Lonsdale is the managing partner at 8BC, which is a US-based venture capital firm managing several $billion in committed capital. He was the co-founder of Palantir and Epirus, as well as an early stage investor in national security relevant companies such as Anduril, Resilience, and Rebellion. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Lonsdale. Appreciate it. So just give everybody a little bit of context of what the panel is actually going to be going over. So for today's discussion, we will be focusing on how the Air Force and its mission partners like venture capital are actually trying to develop ways to reinvigorate the critical partnerships that drove the United States' first high-tech revolution, right? So novel ideas that drove the development and strengthening of the United States writ large, right, were grounded in close, mutually beneficial partnerships that are critical to defending the intellectual property of America, as well as helping the country protect itself from expansive amount of sophisticated 21st century threats. So gentlemen, we'll go right into the questions. General Holt, we'll start with you, and then we'll pass it over to Mr. Lonsdale. But technologies that both the DoD and venture capital fund, so we're talking about AI, we're talking about autonomy, we're talking about biotech, they are already transforming how we live, work, and fight, right? Mm-hmm. Our near-peer competitors are deeply interested in shaping the development of those critical technologies. So the first question, sir, is what are the stakes for the next 20 years for our investment in technology?
Yeah, so thanks, Michael. One of the things I would back us up on a little bit is you just heard the Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force talk about the threat and equated this challenge that we're in to the Cold War. I would tell you it's even harder than that. If you could imagine in the Cold War when we fought that long war against the Soviet Union and all of their capabilities, we're talking about an economy that was probably not as big as Texas's economy. And now we're dealing with an economic juggernaut that I wouldn't say is near peer, but peer and soon will eclipse us in economic power. They have 1.5 billion people in a growing consumer economy. So a lot of the dual use tech that you're talking about, you know, American companies and countries around the world through One Belt, One Road are now having to face some very tough decisions about where is the future lie? Is it with China or is it with America? And so we have a very sobering reality that is upon us. And you're going to hear me throughout this discussion and others speak very candidly about the threat we face as Americans, because it is not just a military problem, as you heard the Vice Chief say. In fact, China's been observing the American way of war for decades. And they understand that they don't need to face our military strength against their military strength, at least not initially. And so they have been unapologetically using economic and information manipulation and coercion to great effect. And frankly, my biggest fear is that we'll never actually get to use the military instrument of national power, and we'll lose all the way to their definition of victory in the 21st century, which I don't think is about holding property or blowing up buildings in New York City. I think it's about controlling all decisions that are made by government officials, businesses, and even individuals across the globe. And frankly, I think they've been at this for a long time. You know, we as Americans tend to let ourselves off the hook a little bit by saying, oh, they think in 100-year increments and we've got plenty of time. I would say they're towards the end of that game rather than towards the beginning of that. And so the time is now, in my opinion, to bring America back together again, 1930s style, where we bring capital markets and entrepreneurs and frankly, the marketplace has changed so much where the commercial side of America is so much faster and more innovative than the defense side. In the 1980s, I would say the exact opposite. But we still have the acquisition system and the resourcing system of the Cold War, of the 1900s, and that's not going to win in this next challenge. And so it's important for us all to get together and work these challenges together.
Perfect. No, great. Mr. Lonsdale, same question.
Yeah, well, I agree with the general's hawkishness on China, and I agree with the concern there. I also think it's important to understand how the world has shifted the last 70 years, right? So, as he explained, American government was actually one of the most competent innovators in our society in the 1950s, in the 1960s, 70s. And this came from a few different things. It used to be the innovation was a lot more expensive. If you wanted to do certain things, you needed a lot of capital. So you had fewer places to go if you were really innovative. You had to be part of a Bell Labs, of something a DoD was doing. So you're able to attract a lot more top talent. And the things we put in place, when you had a total war in World War II, it brought out a lot of the best and brightest in our country to serve and to fight for that total war. And you had a structure that brought those people to the top. So you had a very, very efficient place where the best and brightest were running our government. And we have to be realistic about what's going on right now. Innovation has become very, very inexpensive. Innovation comes from anywhere now. The world's a lot more asymmetric. Back in the 1950s, you could say, we're going to spend X billion dollars and we're going to get a certain number of tanks and planes and whatever, and they're going to be the best. It doesn't work that way anymore. You can't just throw huge amounts of money with a 1961 process, I believe we're using, at the problem. That's not going to work. It very clearly doesn't work. And we're really in a bit of a crisis here on a lot of levels. One of the things we do, I moved here from Silicon Valley a year ago, and we build technology companies, we invest in technology companies, and we track top talent. That's a really big thing. There really is. One thing the government doesn't really acknowledge in this 1960s style anymore is the idea of a 10x or a 50x engineer. There really is truly top talent. And that talent, the computer science side, has mostly not been going into the military, has not been going into the legacy defense companies. There's actually very few of them have. And when they do, they usually leave pretty quickly because culturally these places don't know how to work with these people for the most part. And this is a crisis because the very best technology is going to be built by small groups of the very most talented people. And China and other countries are doing a better job of harnessing that talent. So we have some real challenges ahead of us.
No, gentlemen, excellent answers. And to be honest with you, to understand where we need to go, we sort of have to look in the past, right? But speaking about moving forward, we have seen a lot of our key strategic leaders in the Air Force and the DoD start to say big, some people even say disruptive ideas being thrown out. We just heard Vice Chief say General Brown's edict, accelerate, change, or lose, and he has papers that back up exactly what his vision are. And even our newly appointed Secretary of the Air Force, Mr. Kendall, he's saying, hey, we have this one team, one fight motto, meaning like we cannot lose situation, right? So these types of messages are seen as like the impetus for us to try to do something different. The stand-up of organizations like AFWorks, for example, or even us participating on this stage in this environment is very non-Air Force DoD, right? So with that being said, seeing that the changes that have already been taking hold, what are the most important disruptive changes you'd like to see in the future?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, accelerate, change, or lose. I like to say in Air Force contracting, as the business leaders for the Department of the Air Force, we were doing accelerate, change, or lose before it was cool. Because we do see this threat. In fact, 3 years ago when I took the job, the very first thing I did was to get together a classified threat briefing for all my 8,000 contracting officers, because they really needed to hear somebody who has sat in their seat, has dealt with all the compliance issues of this crazy system that we have to navigate, talk about the threat for an hour without once talking about contracting or regulations or compliance or anything else. And we have been on this journey for a while. So we've made a lot of disruptive changes in the way that we even think about our role. But as we look forward, to the point of your question, there's a couple of things that are emerging right now. One that I would say is well on the way and is actually proven in some programs I can't talk to you about, and that's digital acquisition. So digital engineering, digital twinning, DevSecOps software development instead of working through waterfalls over years of periods of time, and open systems architecture. Open systems architecture is really unlocking all of the major weapon system buys, even to the smallest of innovators. Because if we can start to identify government-owned interfaces, we don't really care so much about the intellectual property and the subcomponents anymore. We just need to know what's the size, weight, mass, power, center of gravity for that black box, and then we can actually create an entire ecosystem if we can flip the business model. But that's something important that hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about on one of the disruptive changes coming up on the business side that will enable some of the technology side. The second big disruptive change that I'm unfortunately have to tell you is not here yet is us challenging from Capitol Hill all the way down this 1961 PPBS process that Robert McNamara came up with in 1961. And it has driven us to a place that is the resourcing system for our national security enterprise. And it is so micromanaged to the point where we actually put from the statutory level the name of the program on that money and what part of the program that money can be spent on. And then during execution year, we have limited to no ability to move money around to opportunities or threats. China can move money inside 20 minutes inside of our own capital markets. And we have to think of something 4 years in advance, 3 to 4 years in advance to get something into this PPBS process. And so my disruptive thinkers in business leadership are really thinking through in key result teams, how can we develop some pilot programs like one that I call free cash flow to actually ask the Congress to allow limited authority for us to be able to reinvest money rapidly at the speed of heat. That's the business side that will unlock the kind of innovation that you're seeing here and allow us to not just say we'll think about it, but to say yes on the spot in execution year.
Be truly disruptive.
The Air Force is very lucky to have a leader like General Holt. I'm very aligned on that. If you want to stop and think, what's our advantage against China? Why can we beat China? And if you go back to the mid 20th century, most of our elite was convinced the Soviet Union was going to be a bigger economy, right? If you go to Paul Samuelson's economic textbook back then, they explained how sometime in this part of the 70s or 80s, the Soviet Union would pass our economy, and they really believed in centralization. They believed centralization was the way to run the world. And the elite were wrong, fortunately. It turned out freedom won. It turned out liberty and bottom-up society was a better way to run the world. And if you look at everything that the general is speaking about here, he's talking about how can America harness the fact that we're an open and free society where genius comes from everywhere. And if we stick to what the elite put in place 60 years ago, where everything's top down, everything's micromanaged, we're not going to beat China at that game. We're only going to beat China if we use the fact that we're a free society with amazing innovation, and we can partner with our society and use that to have a better outcome. That's what we need to figure out here.
No, gentlemen, I honestly wish we had an hour long. I just got the 1 minute flash, but what I do want to say is thank you both for your time and willingness. I would like to continue this discussion at some point in time. Maybe we can figure out something virtual, get it taped, because some of the questions that are most pressing and pertinent to this audience as well as everywhere else in the DoD is we have groups that have not traditionally been sitting on the same stage talking about something that's very important to the national security and then the perseverance of the American way. I think that honestly is probably the most beautiful thing I can say right now. But I really do appreciate your time. I want to thank Capital Factory for allowing us to be here for the event, as well as partnership with our AFWorks people. So thank you all for attending. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I do want to say thank you to Joe and his folks. A great companion in this fight. And then also, please don't underestimate how powerful you guys are in this whole thing. Take ownership of that. I actually, there's a lot of contractors that come see me saying that, how can I do business with you? I'm actually asking you, how can I do business with you? I'm wanting to attract you to the Air Force and Space Force. And so I would just want to say thank you for being patient with us as we work through the problems to get there. But I'm confident that this is the way we're going to beat China.
Michael, so we actually built in some time for questions. So we have some online. If you're online with us, you hear my voice right now. But throw your questions in the chat. If you're here, don't mind raising your hand. We'll get a microphone to you. But the first question that came in from the chat is right up there on the screen. If you wouldn't mind, Michael, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question is, in this new age of warfare, is there a focus on innovation of behavioral science, psychology, linguistics, and other sciences? Gentlemen, it's a coin toss for whoever wants to answer that one.
Well, I'll start. I do love our country. I love our Air Force, but I'm also candid about criticizing it from time to time. I think that we have been, as a nation, increasingly more apologetic about using our economic power and our information power, which I would tell you all is still very substantial in the world if we would choose to use it. What I would tell you is China through One Belt, One Road and other initiatives that are definitely targeted towards lowering our diplomatic influence in the world vis-a-vis China, that are very effective. Their information power, where they would show images of Afghanistan to Taiwan and ask them to consider whether their partnership with America should go on or not. They have risen this to an art form. In terms of the behavioral sciences, it's been a little bit unnerving for us because we tell the truth. That's one of the foundations of who we are as Americans. We tell the truth. And sometimes using information power feels a little bit unnatural to us because people think it may be like trying to manipulate the truth. But what I would offer is we need to invest more time and energy in that and just tell the truth. Because the fact of the matter is the truth of America, the truth of our story is quite compelling. I think we used to do that in the Cold War well. I don't think we do anymore. But I think we ought to get back to that.
We not only don't do it well anymore, a lot of money we spend on these things have been co-opted by groups that are anti-American and that are used American budgets around the world to do anti-American propaganda, frankly. So it's a huge issue. We should be doing a lot better. Yep.
Awesome. Great. Did we have a question from the audience? Anybody raise your hand? Going once? Twice? Oh man, we got a brave soul. Awesome. Right here in the middle. There you go.
Thanks very much, Lieutenant General. Thanks so much for your service. Your vision is inspiring to us all, and you're in such a critical, important role to the future of our society. So thank you for that. My question is around many of the programs that are being directed now and stood up to focus on just what you're speaking about. There seems to be a lot of interest in and support for that. One act which I've heard of and have had some level of engagement with is the what was the Endless Frontier Act. Now it's the Innovation and Competition Act. Will that have any impact on what you're doing, or is that a program that will stand alone and have its own direction and its own initiatives?
Yeah. So I have heard of that act, and I've taken a look at it. And frankly, when I read the objective of it, it gave me a lot of hope. I was very excited immediately because for those of you who are not familiar with that, it would provide funding for some of these big ideas to go get after. Very similar to the way that we use the Defense Production Act, or have used the Defense Production Act prior to World War II, if anybody remembers that, where we just decide, look, we need microelectronics. Let's go build a company right now to whatever scale we need it for our national security, for example. However, since I read it initially and been following it on the Hill, I've noticed that a lot of good ideas have crept into it. A lot of, I don't know what the proper thing to say is, pork barrel politics or whatever you want to say. And I think that kind of thing, when we're talking about how grave the threat is and how immediate this threat is, does a disservice to our nation. We need to just focus on doing those things for national security, in my view, and I mean, pork serves its purpose, so don't get me wrong. I'm not like saying we should not be a free country or be a representative republic, which we are. But I would say when we have such an urgent and grave threat, we need to keep politics out of it and then focus. Defense Production Act, I think, would be a very useful tool to do that. But I haven't seen big moves on that front yet. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If you don't mind, round of applause. Michael, great panel. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank